done of it by one of the newest addition to the government's cabinet, that's Marlon Morgan. You remember, I said there's been three budget contributions so far. That is the Finance Minister, Favor Williams, who gave her maiden presentation last week, where she announced that the government will be abolishing income tax for all individuals earning up to $2 million on a phased basis over the next 3 years.
And so, Madam Speaker, the good news. The good news, this government will increase the threshold to $2 million. However, colleagues, remember, we are a responsible government. And so we'll increase the threshold in 3 tranches to 1.8, then 1.9, then 2 million over a 3-year period starting April 1, 2025. Doing it this way means our hardworking taxpayers don't have to guess and spell next year or the next year or the next year.
And that's Favor Williams, Minister of Finance and the Public Service. She also announced that for the 8th consecutive year, the government has levied no new taxes to fund its spending plans. The Finance Minister also announced the creation of a micro market for the Jamaica Stock Exchange. Minister Williams says the micro market will be established to meet the needs of MSMEs, requiring between $10 million and $50 million in participating equity capital. In the meantime, on Thursday, the opposition spokesman on finance, Julian Robinson, making his contribution to the debate, he pledged that a future PNP government will extend the amount of time tertiary graduates have before they are required to start repaying their loans from the Students' Loan Bureau.
He also pledged to introduce a flat rate for the bills of senior citizens who are customers of the National Water Commission.
I now want to move to how we plan to help those senior citizens, those who are 65 and over. Mr. Speaker, we're going to introduce for our elders or senior citizens who are retired a flat rate for their National Water Commission water bills. A flat rate. So every Jamaican 65 or over will benefit from a capped flat rate that will help to ease the financial burden. They have, and it is not going to be one rate across the board because people have different consumption patterns, right? And so you work out, and we will work out what that rate.
And that's Julian Robinson, opposition spokesman on finance, and opposition leader Mark Golding made his contribution on Tuesday. Mr. Golding is promising to dramatically improve the housing availability in the country. Among those programs is a $1 billion loan facility for young first-time buyers.
We recognize that often the hardest hurdle for young people in buying a home is the deposit. Well, young people, we have you in mind. Yes. The next PNP government will establish a special Young Owners Deposit Fund of $1 billion within the NHT. Yes. Using those NHT resources to enable young persons under 35 years of age to access $500,000 towards their deposit once they have been an NHT contributor for 2 years or more.
That is opposition leader Mark Golding. Well, to assess this, we have with us Marlon Morgan. He's a recently appointed senator and also, I believe, a state minister, correct, Mr. Morgan?
No, sir.
Just a senator.
Just a senator.
Of the upper house, where I humbly serve until such time that the most honorable Prime Minister determines otherwise.
Very well. So, Mr. Morgan, your assessment of specifically the contributions of Julian Robinson and Mr. Golding to the budget debate presentation.
Yeah. So I think establishing context for your listeners is an important starting point. You'll recall and appreciate that the PNP has been in opposition some 9 years now. In terms of this Mark Golding iteration, they have been at it for some 4.5 years now, and you would really think, gentlemen, that to the extent that elections turn on, or at least ought to turn on, the degree to which a political party can present cogent, credible, coherent, and compelling programs and proposals, because an opposition party is an alternative to the government of the day. And to the extent that the PNP, having all of 4.5 years under Mark Golding's incumbency as party leader, failed to do that in terms of this cycle of the budget debate. They have come with some proposals. A number of them I consider to be not well thought out. A number of them are, quite frankly, half-baked. And most importantly, there has been no costing to what it is that the PNP has placed on the table. And as such, the credibility of these proposals have to be in question, because it cannot be that we're in the throes of the budget debate, the last one before the country is sent to the polls in terms of general elections, and you have failed to come in a very compelling and credible way with a program of proposals as an alternative, and a government in waiting, and of course something that is properly costed so that Jamaicans can look on and come away with a degree of, credibility. That, okay, if we go in this direction, it will not harm the fiscal dynamics of the country, especially
Is it though, Marlon, that you are asking for so much in a budget presentation? Because typically the opposition will come and put what they propose to be the alternative if they form government. And normally the information follows with the costing and all of that. You really expected Mr. Golding to provide the costing on every initiative that he put forward in that presentation he had?
No reasonable and well-thinking Jamaican could necessarily suggest that every granular detail of costing be presented. But what is clear, gentlemen, is that a budget debate, the budget is precisely that. The budget debate turns on the numbers, it turns on the fiscal parameters within which the country is operating, and what at the very forefront of your utterances and proposals in the budget debate must be the financial, the numbers and the finances of the country in terms of what is proposed to be expended and what is essentially available to be expended, matched against, of course, revenues that will perform and, of course, credibly support the budget. So that is what the budget at its heart is about. And to the extent that you would have had all this time to so prepare, it is unacceptable to let the PNP off the hook by coming out with what some people on social media and elsewhere are now describing, gentlemen, as a run-with-it budget, a desperation budget, and a budget which essentially sets out a raft of unrealistic proposals. Because one of the important things to consider, Sanjay and Siobhan, in this, is that so much of what Mark Golding exposed yesterday has to do with seeding revenue, in other words, giving up revenue, not least the $11 billion at the NHD. So you're giving up $11 billion at the NHD, you're setting aside $1 billion at the NHD at the same time to help to give youngsters $500,000 toward the down payment on a housing unit. And in this employer's tax credit, you're proposing to move the existing employer's tax credit from 30% to some 40%. All of that involves giving up revenue. So in short, gentlemen, the PNP is giving up a lot of revenue based on their proposals, but at the same time suggesting that they're going to be doing so much more. The question this evening is how come? How can you be proposing to do so much more with such fewer resources? It doesn't compute, it is not credible, and it is not rocket science, gentlemen, as to why they have not properly costed this thing and present it in clear and no uncertain terms to the people of Jamaica, the very people who they will be calling on in a few weeks or months from now to vote for them to form government.
But tell me, Marlon, as I heard it from one comrade, there is the discretionary aspect of the budget, meaning what priorities the JLP government may have, our future PNP administration may not have. So they might switch some programs that are currently in train to programs that they feel may be more viable. What do you make of that assessment?
I heard the deputy opposition spokesman on finance with that same observation this morning, and it is true. It is indeed the case where there is a discretionary discretionary element in any national budget in the sense that our budget will largely reflect a government's fundamental manifesto undertakings and, of course, their priorities in the same way we did when we formed government in March of 2016. However, what we're urging the PNP to do is to tell the Jamaican people, set out in no uncertain terms, because when we speak of discretionary spending, gentlemen, you have to understand that the monies that are contained in the budget are earmarked to finance and underwrite certain line items. So what the PNP should be hard-pressed on an evening like this to tell us is, okay, of the things that the whole administration proposes to do, which one of them are you going to stand down? Are you going to stand down the water system for the people out in the Grail and elsewhere in Western Jamaica? Are you going to be standing down the Spark program? Are you going to be standing down the instituted social pension for persons aged 75 and over? We heard Mikhail Phillips complaining about JUTC buses being rolled out into rural Jamaica. The PNP needs to tell us, will you be scaling back the rollout of JUTC buses such that it operates only in the KMA, the Kingston metropolitan area? Are you going to be depriving the people of St. Thomas and Castleton of the services of the JUTC? Are you going to be purchasing less JUTC buses? What are the things that you're going to be giving up in order to do this discretionary thing that you are now banning about? So in order to give away all of these goodies that you suggest that you're going to give, yes? Is it that you're not going to be increasing the income tax threshold and essentially reducing people's income taxes? What are the things that you're going to be giving up? Because every cent in this budget presented by Fiverr Williams is essentially matched to an item of expenditure. They need to tell us what items of expenditure they will be standing down. Because when we were in opposition, we indicated that this hedge business that they had in relation to oil, that fuel hedge that they had, we indicated that that never did ever keep in our JLP administration. And that is what created room, fiscal room for us, in part, to have delivered in April of 2016 the move from 592,000 in terms of the income tax threshold to the 1 million that we moved it initially in on a phased basis. So they must come and tell us what they're going to give up.
Except though, Marlon, you will recall that when the JLP was in opposition, that same 1.5 that was the major campaign promise, and that the hedge, you will be utilizing funds from the hedge to fund it. When the JLP went into government, they recognized that enough money wasn't there. And like any other government, they found ways to get the money. So it could be the very same thing for the People's National Party.
Well,
you don't expect for them, as I said initially, to provide all the granular details. But of course, governments will have their priorities.
Yeah. First of all, Sanjay, you are absolutely technically incorrect on that point about the manifesto undertaking that the JLP gave.
Oh, sorry.
So just to be very clear for the benefit of our listeners this evening and the viewers on YouTube, right? The JLP back in February of 2016 gave an undertaking to those Jamaicans who are earning an income of up to $1.5 million. The policy that we conceived of would have applied only to those persons, while the income tax, essentially the threshold for persons earning above 1.5 would continue to be the case. The IMF, you'll recall that we were in the throes of an IMF program. When we won government and took office in March 2016, the IMF essentially indicated that, listen, for simplicity, ease of collection, and seamlessness in the tax regime in the country, it is not appropriate to have two separate thresholds. And so you cannot have 1.5 being the threshold that applies to people earning up to $1.5 million, while you have the $592,000 income tax threshold applying to the people who earn above 1.5, because indeed, based on the tax relief, you may be providing a disincentive to people to earn in excess of 1.5, because some people who are earning less annually would end up taking home more in real terms than those persons who are actually earning, let us say, 1.6 million or 1.7 million at the time. So in short, and for the benefit of the listeners, in short, what the JLP proposed to do in February 2016, it delivered something fundamentally more, because the idea is that it had to deliver an income tax threshold to everybody across the board, not just the pool of persons to whom the manifesto undertaking was given. So it actually over-delivered, it actually overshot, because the IMF indicated that you cannot have two different thresholds applying. You must just, for simplicity and efficiency purposes, have one standard income tax, personal income tax threshold across the board. And so we did it on a phased basis, and we did it in a fiscally responsible way. And you'll recall, gentlemen, that the PNP, Dr. Phillips included, and others like Mark Golding and Peter Bunting would have shouted it down to indicate that, listen, this is going to run us into wreck, this is going to run us off the rails, and we have delivered 1.5 in such an appropriate and sustainable way that we are now able to present our 9th consecutive budget, gentlemen, with no new taxes, and indeed our 10th budget with no net new taxes.
And I hear you, Marlon, but let's go back to that matter of the 1.5. I mean, when you came into power as the JLP, there was obviously some understanding that the reality of governance required that you had to phase it in. You could not necessarily put it in one go. Would they then give that same assessment to the pledges put forward by Mr. Golding and Mr. Robinson in their budget presentations, that maybe we're being unreasonably in the expectation that these are things they intend to put in day one?
Well, first of all, it is for the PNP, it behooves the PNP, led by Mark Golding, to set out a smart timeline as to when what they are proposing will take place. It is not for us to speculate. None of us, gentlemen, have the gift of clairvoyance. And so we do not know what their thinking is, but if it is that they are coming with a manifesto commitment on which they want us to elect them into office, I think it should really be as soon as possible, as we did when we pledged 1.5. Because remember, we took office the March of 2016 and we delivered the 1.5 as at April of 2016, similar to 2007 when we promised the things we promised. We promised, yes, to essentially institute tuition-free education, and we did that in September of academic year 2007-2008, and the free healthcare that we had pledged back in 2007, we delivered that the April of 2008. So it has to be with relatively quick dispatch, because that is what you would have been calling on the people, the electorate, to vote for. So you can't come and ask us to vote for this 500,000 that the PNP is ostensibly proposing to give to young people, and then you only deliver it in year 4 or year 5 of a term of office. And what we're saying is that the PNP simply does not have the capacity to do what it is proposing. This is simply a run-with-it budget. The PNP doesn't have a track record, as it were, of doing things in a responsible way in terms of, yes, presiding over no new taxes. And if you go the route of giving these persons your vote, you will essentially be setting up a situation where we get back to the days of heavy taxation in this country, because you cannot have so much revenue being given up based on what Mark Golding and Julian Robinson have announced in their respective budget presentations, and then seeking to do so much more on the expenditure side. The two don't reconcile. You're giving up a lot while proposing to spend more. Taxation will have to come into the mix, and it is for that precise reason why Mark Golding at no point yesterday indicated in an emphatic way that the PNP that he leads will not resort to new taxes.
I hear you, Morgan. I want to turn to the NHT, but please stay with Morgan, who is really attacking some of the promises made by the opposition regarding their pledges if they form the next government. And I would like Mr. Morgan to speak about the NHT, because as I understood it, when the $11 billion drawdown was taken from the NHT back in 2014 or thereabouts, it was on the premise that the NHT was very well capitalized, and that at that point it was essentially just wasting money. And I don't know if that reality has changed. Could you suggest to me, is there some suggestion that this 11 billion is somehow putting the NHT in a difficult position?
Excellent question, Siobhan, and I'll share this with you and I'll share this with the listeners. Favour Williams, our first woman finance minister, went to great lengths last Tuesday to indicate that this administration stands on a platform of fiscal responsibility. Indeed, we are about fiscal discipline and not running with it. When the government considers the financial state and health of our public bodies, in this case, for example, the National Housing Trust, the determination is that based on the endowment of the NHD, based on its program of work in terms of the medium term, tapping the NHD for the $11 billion would not be inimical to the interest of prospective homeowners in this country, indeed the interest of working class Jamaicans. In other words, the two things can happen simultaneously, because the truth of the matter is that given the fiscal program that the government has before it, and based on the critical deliverables, including certain capital expenditures, infrastructure work to bring water to more communities and households. This is very useful in supporting the FED program. And for the set of people who are proposing to discontinue that, they must tell us how it is that they're going to manage to see that kind of financial inflow while at the same time spending more. And there's another important thing that I'd like to point out to you both, gentlemen. So much of what the PNP is proposing to do or passing off as their policy platform and prescriptions were they to form government are actually things that are already in train and are being done by the government. I cite a few examples. They speak about a road maintenance approach and, of course, scheduling when roads will come up for repairs. The Prime Minister articulated precisely that in about August of last year with one of the and he spoke that this government pursuing a single target so that being place where the NWA is saying this is Irish Council saying no, this is not our road, this is NWA road. Jamaicans want that is what they care about. It matters to them whether NWA road, community road, or a parish council road. They want to know that them have good road.
And when is that going to come into fruition? Because something we've been discussing for a while.
Started in that regard, Sanjay. Considerable work has started in that regard, because as you'll appreciate, a reform and a project such as this has to be underpinned by the requisite capacity, internal and otherwise, human and otherwise capacity. But more importantly, the government through the NWA has gone out to appropriately quantify our network of roads in this country. So prior to the work that has been done, it was considered that Jamaica had somewhere in the order of 22,000 or 23,000 kilometers, yes, of roadway in the country. Based on the empirical work that has been done, actually going out into the highways and byways across the country and quantifying our stock of road, as it were, if I could loosely use that expression, the stock of road network that we have comes up to 27,000 kilometers. Now, what they're doing as well is developing a database where they are literally putting into that database the status of the respective roads, so you will know which road is in a state of disrepair, which road surfaces are okay, and therefore you're able to determine and program from there when respective stretches of road will be due for routine and appropriate maintenance, whether it is a degree of repaving or an entire rebuilding. So that is what we want to get to, and that is something that will be advanced even further in a third term of the Andrew Holness-led Jamaica Labour Party government. But just let me enumerate a couple other things that Mark Golding said yesterday that are already in train. So he speaks to a plan to do screening with respect to cancers, for example, in the country. The Jamaica Labour Party government has utilized and has tapped the National Health Fund to deliver to our population of men in this country PSA screens to essentially detect prostate cancer, because as we know, in a majority black population, we are highly susceptible to incidence of prostate cancer, and of course the prevalence of prostate cancer has emerged in this country, and so government is actually in a targeted way seeking to treat with this particular debilitating illness, which is very prevalent in our population, prostate cancer, and so the support for payment and concessions with respect to PSA tests are in place. We have also sought to treat with cervical cancer through the HPV vaccines. And of course, you may have seen on social media, gentlemen, the Agriculture Minister, Flood Green, shoot back at Julian Robinson, for want of a better expression, insofar as Julian proposing to do research and innovation with respect to agriculture and irrigation and cold storage. And the Agriculture Minister had to appropriately indicate to him how far advanced we are with respect to research and innovation, with respect to irrigation across the country, not least the Essex Valley system, and of course other systems that are being built out. And the cold storage facility that we just opened the other day over in Manchester. So the idea is that the key things that are confronting the country, this and Jehonas-led administration is dealing with it. We are angle and triangle the things, and that's why George Davis quite rightly described the challenge the PNP has as one in which they are being boxed out essentially, because when you have an incumbent government performing so well, gentlemen, your room to maneuver as an opposition, a set of people who are an alternative, or at least seeking to be an alternative, you do not have much room to maneuver, and that is why we got from Mark Golding what we got yesterday in terms of repeats of existing programs.
But to be fair, though, Marlon, the matter of owning a house is a difficult situation that many of us face in the country. And some of the proposal put forward by Mr. Golding to deal with, for example, he gave the initiative rent to own. So if you can't find a deposit, which, as you know, many individuals struggle to find a deposit, you're paying as rent. And then once you reach that certain amount that would form the deposit, then it transfers to a mortgage. So some of those ideas are not bad ideas to help those who are trying to own a home.
These are not bad ideas, and that is why I would read for you, Sanjay in particular, an article titled "Wholeness Says Rent to Own Housing Program Coming," and he was speaking on in May of 2022, and I'm starting here because there's a subsequent development to this. It says here, Ricardo and Sanjay rather, and Siobhan, the government is promising to ease the demand for housing by allowing Jamaicans to acquire their homes in a rent-to-own arrangement. This was the Prime Minister speaking in 2022. Capri did a study in relation to this where the idea of rent-to-own was broached. I think the study dates back to 2015. And in 2024, in the 2024-2025 debate, the Prime Minister indicated some important advances in this regard, where the NHD actually commenced this kind of arrangement in the fiscal year 2024-2025. So again, I say, Sanjay, and for the benefit of...
Wait, Marlon. So I don't want to preempt the Prime Minister's speech. Should we expect an announcement regarding that rent-to-own initiative from the Prime Minister in his budget presentation?
I, too, wouldn't want to preempt the Prime Minister's speech. I can assure you, though, that the Prime Minister has, as the chief builder in this country, the man who has presided over the build-out of many housing solutions in the country and, of course, many housing starts, including, of course, houses under the new social housing program, where many indigent Jamaicans have benefited from houses under the new social housing program, in addition to what Desmond McKenzie has going on through the Poor Relief Department and his ministry, the indigent houses. So the Prime Minister, as you know, as the builder-in-chief, will be setting the record straight. You saw a particular gentleman taking to the stump in recent weeks and essentially seeking to set the record straight. We will see a real setting of the record straight when the Prime Minister takes to his feet.
No, but currently, Marlon, there's no rent-to-own program.
Will be one of them.
No, but hold on. Currently, there is no rent-to-own program. What you indicated is that in 2022, the Prime Minister made the announcement that they're looking in that direction. Are you suggesting that plans are in train and we will hear something shortly about rent-to-own program?
I'm actually indicating to you, gentlemen, that the Prime Minister announced that in the budget debate of last year. Yes?
Yeah, so, and how far down the wiki are we? That is a really real question.
Get details on that tomorrow, because what I have here before me, and I will read this. In his 2024-2025 budget presentation in Parliament in March, Prime Minister Holness announced a new program by the National Housing Trust where contributors who are first-time home buyers may use their accumulated points and NHT benefits to access one-bedroom apartments, particularly within or near urban centers as starter homes. These apartments will be made available to contributors via sale agreements with an optional buyback clause.
I actually do. Now that you read it out, I do recall that in his budget presentation, and I suppose it is to get an update on where that program is actually.
And just to read this final paragraph, it says here, there are many persons working in, this is a direct quote of the Prime Minister, by the way, speaking last year, i.e. in the 2024-2025 budget. He says here, there are many persons working in all kinds of industry who earn relatively decent salaries that, instead of paying rent, they could use the money for rent to pay for a mortgage, which preserves their equity in a property. They can then build upon the equity in future years. The government thinks this is a very innovative solution that will help to ease the housing shortage that is right across Jamaica. This is Andrew Holness, gentleman, speaking in the 2024-2025 budget debate. And as I said before, the gentleman takes to his feet in less than 24 hours, and I trust, yes, in fact, I am very confident that as the builder-in-chief, the man who dons a safety vest and a hard helmet and hard boots will be demonstrating and setting the record straight as to sweeping reforms and initiatives that are fit for purpose at the National Housing Trust. And importantly, gentlemen, doing so in a sustainable and responsible way, because anybody can take to their feet and talk anything will come at them out. Yes? But just to be clear, our things are appropriately costed, and we are the people of fiscal responsibility and fiscal discipline. We are not the run with this crew.
And just finally, on that same topic of sustainability, Marlon, because this one, I do feel the opposition has a point. This utilization of future revenues to fund current projects, and I see where the opposition pointed out that there's another 58 billion in a major item to be sold off by the government. Can you give us an understanding as to what is the government's thinking in this kind of arrangements? For such example, the selling of the Trans-Jamaica Highway shares, the securitization of the NMIA revenues. I believe the opposition has a point that it's not necessarily the best idea to lock out those revenues from the coffers for an extended period of time.
Well, I want to just apprise both you as the program hosts and your listeners, yes, that the divestment essentially of holdings in an entity such as Trans-Jamaica Highway is in keeping with the philosophy and the orientation of this government. The government need not hold the commanding heights of the economy where there are things that the private sector are well placed to preside over and to do. So the government, from time to time, gentlemen, will always take a look at its holdings, of course, and make determinations in the best interest of the country and devise approaches to divesting its interest in the commanding heights of the economy in ways that benefit a broad cross-section of the Jamaican people. And that is why, as you saw with Wigton and as you saw in a previous iteration with Trans-Jamaica Highway, there is now to be a second iteration of Trans-Jamaica Highway. But alas, Sanjay and Siobhan, we are in a budget debate. Our first batsman took to the wicket and Fiverr did so last Tuesday. The Prime Minister takes to his feet tomorrow, but importantly as well, the Finance Minister will rebut and close out the budget debate, and I am very confident that on the business of the sale of receivables, she will have an appropriate response, an appropriate rebuttal to the observation, or I dare say, the caution presented last afternoon by Mark Jefferson Golding.
Okay, that is Senator Marlon Morgan. So I suppose all eyes are now on Prime Minister Dr. Andrew Holness and his budget presentation tomorrow. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Morgan.